Well, it was only recently in the United Kingdom that Obi Ezekwesili, Nigeria's former education minister, also spoke about the people asking questions, talking about leadership and accountability. Well, as we move towards 2015 elections, a whole lot of politicking going on, but we also need to draw from those that have been around, that have seen things, to see what the younger Nigerian can actually get to pick out of some of the mistakes and possibly see how we can get to rewrite things and rebuild our nation. Joining us this morning to look at the leadership question and rebuilding of the nation as Nigeria's former ambassador to the United Kingdom, High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. I was trying to remember that. Christopher Kolade, good morning and thanks for joining us.
Morning. Pleasure.
Well, I think the pleasure is ours. Good to have you. A whole lot has been happening, and well, Nigerians need to be reminded some of these things that we must have forgotten. And it becomes so hard knowing full well that some younger Nigerians are already making the kind of mistakes some of your generation may have made. What do you think is truly our problem before we start talking about some possible solutions?
I think our problem is that we allow ourselves to look only at the immediate environment and also the short term, and to think that whatever we do today is the, is the end for Nigeria. The truth is that Nigeria has been coming a long time. We celebrated 100 years, we said, this year. And Nigeria has a future ahead of her. Now, therefore, it's important for us to put everything in perspective, to understand that what we are today, where we are today, did not happen without some human input. Therefore, where we're going in future will continue to happen by human input. And as the Lord would have it, we are the humans here today. So we have to make our inputs today so that the future can go the way it should go. So I think it's because we do not contextualize like that we sometimes get it wrong. We think if we do something today, that's it. It cannot be.
We'll come back to see how we can situate it
Yes.
to the Nigerian context now. But again, some have argued that it's almost an African thing, a black African thing. Perhaps we should go to this particular report and see what transpired in the UK, where Obi Ezekwesili spoke with some other Africans.
The annual conference of the Royal African Society for this year was a rallying point for activating citizen participation in the affairs of the continent. Delivering the keynote address, Dr. Obi Ezekwesili highlights the positive economic strides being made across the continent, including Nigeria, but argues that this pattern of economic growth comes with a paradox, as the levels of poverty and inequality is rising side by side the said improvements. The disconnect between growth and poverty then raises the question of demand for inclusion, which seems to be lacking among the citizens.
Institutions are built by citizens. Agencies are created by government, but agencies are not institutions. It is not until citizens take ownership of agencies and constantly make demands on agencies that they begin to transform into institutions. And yet, for many of the citizens on the continent, they couldn't care less about the agencies. They actually are of the belief that someday some Messiah is going to just come and make everything happen well in the country. What they fail to understand is that there must be an incentive or a disincentive that would propel those who govern to make the right sets of choices that would help transform mere agencies into institutions.
Bursts of outrage over perceived government failings have been witnessed in various parts of the continent. A popular movement in Nigeria being the Bring Back Our Girls campaign for the young girls kidnapped in Chibok by the Boko Haram terrorists.
There is often, particularly in Nigeria, outbursts of rage at what the government isn't doing or is doing, and it's never then channeled into a mass movement that the government then has to take notice of.
But demanding for social justice, economic and political inclusion, experts agree, is not a simple task, as many Africans contend with the more demanding challenges of survival. But in Nigeria, with the 2015 general elections around the corner, political apathy is not in anyone's interest.
I think the first thing that needs to happen is that we need awareness. We need to first be aware what the root cause of the problem is. We need to educate ourselves. We need to actually look at the statistics and the numbers and understand why things are the way they are and what we can do and what other places have done to move to a different position.
Africa is rising, but this summit has argued that it will only continue to rise for a few until a substantial amount of its citizens rise up and demand to be included, demand for change. Doris Okenwa, Channel Television News, London.
Well, anyway, what I picked from there, especially for those who are believers of God, the Christians, the Muslims, and others who believe in God, there's one key thing there. We've always thought about a messianic interruption in the affairs of our nation,
Yes.
which, as you rightly said, we are here. We should be the ones to effect some of these changes. How does that...
Yes, especially because, you know, if we go the relationship between man and God for just 1 second, God has equipped man to manage the institutions and affairs of this world. That's what the Bible says. And therefore, if we do not actually take the initiative to manage what God has put us in charge of, then we're wasting the resource that he has put in us. And it's very important. You see, the Lord made people. They also made animals and trees and things like that. But to people, he gave the ability to think, the ability to reason, the ability to put things together and come to a balanced judgment. Now, that's our exclusive territory. That's what we must use in managing our own affairs and the affairs of our environment.
So in managing the affairs, you talked about the equipment in man. It is believed that the younger ones, or you're as good as the example you see. If there are no examples, how do we expect that this generation, I mean, not that there are no examples, no, in quote, worthy examples, how would the younger generation be able to move and rebuild?
That is the challenge. And that is why those who have the, not just the knowledge, the background, the preparation, but also the capacity to speak up should do so that we do not allow ourselves to be sucked into something that says this is all right. Because if we can point to experience of the past that was better than what we're experiencing now, it's our duty to do so, because people learn from what they have experienced, but also learn from what the people who experience it tell them. Now, I usually say now that anyone who's 44 years old today did not live through the Civil War. This means that they did not even know what went on before the Civil War. So you can't blame them for not being personally motivated by any of that. But that's why the people who were there then ought to continue to say, now look, these were the principles that drove certain things. And we should remember, for instance, that it was not easy for Nigeria to become independent, to win sovereignty, there were actually people in leadership who went to jail. They were jailed by the colonial government because they were agitating for independence. Now that's the kind of sacrifice that leadership demands. And if we want to go into the future of this country and think we can just sail into the thing without making sacrifices, then we deceive ourselves.